Hey guys, just kind of wanted to talk about one of the videos that been wanting to do, and I think it's interesting, especially from it's kind of a different take, and maybe it's kind of more defending kind of the Biden policy, but I thought it'd be interesting to kind of talk about it and kind of talk about some of the thoughts that I had when I see this and going on forward. So, to be fair, this doesn't you know, uh, this doesn't incorporate my beliefs and specifically with the Gaza stuff on the personal level and the people level in there. This is just more of just kind of a geostrategic viewpoint that I'm trying to espouse. So essentially, and this the question is why doesn't the U.S. stop supplying weapons to Israel? Especially with the stuff in Gaza. So a lot of the missiles and things like that, they definitely have had a depletion in the stockpile since they've started this invasion in Israel. So, as those are going down, it does kind of make it for a little bit more of an attack from, say, Iran or some of these other countries, mostly like Iran and some of these groups in Lebanon and others. Um, and essentially, kind of why I'm saying they shouldn't is because if Israel stopped receiving weapons, now all this is based off of how you are perceived, not maybe the facts. But I think perception definitely goes a long way when determining what you'll do because you also have intelligence and things like that, and maybe actual stockpiles and things like that aren't maybe known by other countries. So if Israel stopped getting weapons from the United States, they would have this perception that they look weak, that they're going to be diminishing their stockpiles because of what's going on in Gaza. So they would essentially have this decision that they need to make. And it's one where you need to um, you need to decide whether or not you are going to keep prosecuting the war in Gaza with these weapons or you're going to need to save them in case someone else attacks, right? So, from a standpoint of, okay, Iran hadn't hit back on Israel since um, Israel's done their last attack, and they vowed revenge and all that other kind of stuff. So they definitely have a motive for doing it after they had the uh, after they've had the person from Gaza, Hamas, dying in Iran. They said we're going to fight back, we're going to do all this other kind of stuff. So they definitely kind of have like this provocation that they can use, or a casus belli they can use. So the issue is that so if Israel decides, okay, we're going to keep pursuing this war with Gaza, they're going to keep looking weaker and weaker and weaker from a stockpile standpoint, or they'll have to go in and start trying to get weapons from other countries and things like that. But so they would look weak, right? And so then Iran and maybe some of their proxies, especially with Hezbollah, and this is why I don't understand what Israel's doing, and I am honestly extremely concerned because um, Israel's acting as if Hamas is the only thing that they are against or attacking, but you've seen that they've done stuff with Hezbollah with the pagers. They've attacked stuff, people in Syria. You also have some Iraqi groups kind of running around, as well as the Houthis in Yemen, and then you have Iran. So it's not just like there's one person that they would have to attack. So that's why I never really quite understood kind of that policy. Um, Now I think that um, if they kept prosecuting this war in Gaza, nothing's going to change with those countries. If anything, they're going to get worse. I am honestly, as long as there's nothing major like a systematic murder, you know, lining them up, shooting them dead, all this other kind of stuff, I think Saudi Arabia and some of these other countries aren't going to get involved. Um, I think they would need to see more than for them to do that. And I don't think they really want to get involved. I think they're kind of like, hey, there's an interesting discussion about, the older generation cares more about this than the younger generation with the war in Gaza. So I think they're really just kind of like, hey, we don't want to get involved. We're going to play neutral, and we're just going to try to de-escalate everything we can. And I think that's fair. Um, but and that's why I've always disagreed with what Israel's doing, because it's almost they're taking these escalatory steps, and they're not back. They're not trying to find a um, end to the war. They're just trying to keep prosecuting it. So that leaves the alternative where they still prosecute the war in Gaza. They run low on supplies, and then they're essentially making themselves a target for these groups. And so then Hezbollah is going to attack. All these other people are going to attack because, you know, wait them out. Just keep waiting and waiting and waiting, and they're going to be weaker by the day, right? And if Israel doesn't take this into calculation, then their perceived strength will be um, lower tomorrow than it is today. So I think that's kind of how the U.S. looks at it, is that we don't see we don't see Israel not getting weapons as a deterrence for Iran. Because if they keep sending them, then Israel's gonna be as strong today as they are tomorrow. Now these groups think, okay, there's no advantage to attack Israel because they're not going to be weaker tomorrow, which basically means there's no better time. There's no good time to do it, right? If they're strong today or tomorrow, they may be looking for some other sort of um, way to get in there and find an opportunity, right? You don't want to attack someone when they're strong. You want to attack them when they're weak, so that you can maneuver them. You can kind of take over what they need to do and get their objectives. So I think that's kind of how they're looking at it. Is the United States is saying, "Hey, look, a strong Israel is a deterrent compared to a weakened Israel." And so we have to keep supporting them. Now, I think where that kind of goes into, okay, well, so then what could be done and what I think should be done. I think financial aid should be cut off. I mean, Israel is extremely developed country, and I think that um, if they achieved some pain, or if they acquired some pain economically, I think that that would kind of put some pressure on them, and I think that those things need to be stopped. Um, Whereas I think the military aid, unfortunately, has to continue. And then that kind of sucks because, like I said, this isn't necessarily about, this video is not about the people who are in um, in Gaza, but it kind of sucks for them because from their vantage point, they want to see a weakened Israel, because that means that maybe they would be less willing to prosecute the war against them. Whereas with the U.S. strengthening Israel, then the Gazans are going to look at Israel and basically be like, "Hey, this is going to continue." So I think the financial stuff, is the sanctions and stuff like that, is what we need to kind of start looking at. But even with that, I think there's this big fear that if the U.S. did also stop sending them weapons, then Israel's just going to start making their own, right? And if they start making their own, then you start letting your leverage go, right? So the whole leverage and kind of how this relationship is built up is that Israel is supposed to be relying on the U.S. for weapons and aid, and so they've got some sort of leverage over Israel. But if the U.S. stops or essentially removes that leverage, then it almost puts them further and further apart. Whereas that's not in the U.S. geostrategic interest to have Israel kind of be more isolated. Um, so I think it's interesting. Um, it's definitely an interesting question. I just think once you start kind of walking through, okay, is this going to stabilize or destabilize the region, and um, really provide the framework for stability, I think you're going to see that Israel being strengthened just as us strengthening our other allies in the region. It's the only thing you can do, right? Um, but it kind of puts the U.S. back into a bind because it's like, well, what do you do when you don't have any leverage over Iran because you're not in the Iran deal? Um, you don't have any leverage you can use on Israel, and you don't really have leverage on anyone, and the only one who's really able to drive this conversation and drive this relationship and war is Israel. And so you kind of have to let them do their thing until there's a better time to kind of break out. And that's not even to talk about APAC and all these other kind of groups that are lobbying in the US to kind of maintain that support. Um, I just think that given where we're at, there's not really a great outcome that's going to come from um, stopping sending weapons to Israel. Now, I think that could definitely change if maybe the Abraham Accords did go a little further. Then you could have these other countries like Saudi Arabia, who's interested in this, and some of these other ones. Maybe if you could get Jordan and Turkey or whoever else to sign on to it, you could then kind of say, hey, we're going to withdraw from this because of that. That could definitely we will withdraw from the Abraham Accords. That would put some pressure, but you know, when you're talking about, oh, what is the UAE or um, Kuwait or whoever these other countries or Morocco, it doesn't lend the support as the major regional players like Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Egypt kind of withdrawing from it. So I think it's an interesting thought, but I think once you start wargaming and kind of talking about it 2 to 3 more steps down the road, it's not the greatest strategy for stabilizing the region. So that's how I perceive this. And let me know what you think. I try to be a little bit nuanced and separate, like I said, some of the intricacies with Gaza and the people there from this, because I think that um, I don't think it's very helpful when we're talking about kind of how these things are going to happen right now, but are once again 100% important in the big broader picture. So that's uh that's what I think, and let me know. Thanks.